As we get into this class, I have some expectations of you. And you should be familiar with all basic camera controls, all the exposure controls on your camera, and all your focusing controls. This is not a basic photography class. I have another class called Fundamentals of Digital Photography, and I'm not going to be going through all kind of those root explanations of how different things work. Further, you should be completely familiar with depth of field, use of all your shutter speeds, and your focusing. This is just kind of what I expect in here. We will be talking a little bit about this. For those of you that have lots of experience, please don't feel put off. Every once in a while, I got to reach down to the people who don't have as much knowledge and bring them up a little bit. So we are going to cover some basics as well as some more advanced subjects as well. As far as the equipment, we're going to get into that main section coming up, but just real quickly and generally, you should have a camera that you can manually control the exposure on. You need to be able to manually control the focusing on it. It's going to be best with an interchangeable lens camera. It's still possible with the fixed lens cameras or a built-in zoom, but it's best with the interchangeable lens cameras. And it's going to be best with an eye level finder. It's very hard to work with those screens outside in bright sunlight, and so having an eye level finder is definitely going to help out. So I want to give you my formula for taking great nature and landscape photos. And so this is the elements that you need, starting with good equipment. Good equipment does help. We're going to get into that. Next, you need to have, what is this? Right, the proper technique, doing things the right way. And I'm a big proponent of going down to your local park and shooting pictures in your backyard. But folks, I'm going to be honest with you. There are some places on this planet that have a whole lot more photographic potential than other places. I have been on a 6-week trip where I hardly took any photos just because it just really wasn't a place that inspired me, and I just couldn't find those great shots. And there are other places where I'm shooting hundreds and hundreds of photos a day because it is just so rich, and so getting to those rich areas is a lot of fun. Next up, that's right, you need to be there at the right time. Being in the right place, the right time of the season, the right time of the day is critical. And our fifth element is dealing with composition. What you do, your interpretation on any particular scene. And so as we look at kind of the full schedule for this class, we're going to be going through equipment in sections kind of 1 and 2 today. This afternoon, we're going to be going through exposure, and then later today, focus. Day 2 is we're going to be getting more into the artistic side and more of dealing with specific subjects and how to approach them. Whole section just on dealing with different subjects. What about flowers, rivers, mountains, forests, deserts? Going to be talking about tips and techniques for all of those. Dealing with different timing, light, and then finally composition. So let's talk about cameras. What sort of camera should you use? What type of camera can you use? Let's talk about the general camera qualities that nature photographers like. First off, we want high image quality. In nature and landscape photography, there's been a long tradition of very, very good quality images, highly detailed. So we want high image quality. We want to be able to control the exposures. We want to be able to control the focusing. And it's nice to have some different lens options so that we have a variety of looks that we can have for anything that we're doing. And on top of all of this, let's make it very portable because we're going to need to be moving around. We're not often just shooting straight from our car. And so what this means to you is going to be something different than what it means to me and somebody else. And so the balance of these features is where you get to make your own choice among the gigantic world of camera choice. Now, the 3 types of cameras I will be talking about is the good old SLR, the new and upcoming mirrorless cameras, and then talking about point and shoots as well. We're not going to go into the full details of how these work. That's in my other more basic classes. The SLR, the big advantages that I like with the SLR is the really incredibly sharp viewing. Because you are viewing through a mirrored system, you get to look through the actual lens. You get to see the world as sharp as you can see it with your own eyes. It's very good under low light viewing images. So if you're trying to focus on stars or the moon or something very, very dark, you get to use your own human vision, which is actually very good under low light conditions in that viewing system. And these cameras, in general, have very, very high image quality because they have larger size sensors, which is what we're going to talk about in a moment. Now, the disadvantages that we have with these SLRs is this mirror box in the camera isn't completely necessary, and it's taking up a lot of space, and we'll see that more when we talk about the mirrorless cameras. The image that you see is what you get to see with your own eyes, and that is not the way the final image comes out. It's not representative of the dynamic range that you're going to have. It's not representative of the color balance that you have. And so you could be misled into thinking, looking through an SLR, that that's what my final picture is going to look like. That is just simply a preview of what you're going to see. And there is a limited digital assistance, and this digital assistance is something that is in the new mirrorless cameras, and there's a lot of very cool things that are being done with this, and I'm going to show you more about this when we get to the focusing section, because I have examples of how different cameras have things like magnification and peaking in order for you to get super, super sharp images, and we don't have that with the SLRs in their viewfinder. The mirrorless cameras, which are kind of the up-and-coming popular cameras that a lot of people are liking because they are smaller in size, and so it's easier to hike and carry more equipment with you. We have our digital focusing and info aids that I've been just talking about. And the image that you look at in one of these cameras very much represents the final image. One of the things that I like about mirrorless cameras is that you are looking at a digital image, and that's what you're capturing. I found that I changed my workflow with a mirrorless camera, and what I've done is I no longer have my image played back on the back of the screen, because normally on an SLR, I would shoot a picture, and then I would look at the back of the camera to see, well, how did that turn out? Here's what it looks like, here's what I think it looks like, there's what it actually looks like. Now with the mirrorless camera, I've turned that part off, so I just shoot, I see a preview of what I'm shooting, and I shoot it, and I don't worry about playback. And so it actually has sped up the shooting process when shooting with a mirrorless camera. The disadvantages with the mirrorless is that the EVF, the electronic viewfinder, is not as sharp, and so judging critical focus requires those digital aids that come in. In general, a lot of these mirrorless cameras, it's not a rule, but in many of them, we have a lower pixel count than we do in the SLRs. And it's just because a lot of them are using smaller size sensors. It's not the case in all. I know there's some exceptions out there. I'm not going to mention particular cameras. They can be just as good, but in general, the choices out there are mostly that they are a little bit lower image quality. And finally, you're out pretty far from electricity and charging batteries. They do tend to go through batteries more quickly. I find with my mirrorless camera, I can go through a battery a day pretty easily, but on my SLR, it might last me a week, depending on my style of shooting. And so you have to be a little bit more aware of that battery usage. Now, we don't have as many people shooting with the point-and-shoot cameras out there. Obviously, these are going to be very small in size. They're lightweight, very low cost, the type of thing that if somebody's going to go on a long hike, they're going to hike the Pacific Crest Trail that's going to take them 6 months to hike. This is the type of camera that they would bring because they can't budget very much weight. The problem with these cameras is that you have very few options, especially when it comes to manually controlling any sort of features on the camera. They are very difficult to use in bright sunlight because they don't have a traditional viewfinder on it. And because they're small and they use small sensors, they have a lower resolution. And so you are going to be limited in what you can get out of the camera. Are these bad cameras? I didn't say that. You have to look at what your needs are and what you want from it. If you want to post some pictures on Facebook and you want to do a little slideshow on an HD screen, more than enough resolution to do that. But if you really want to get into controlling the various aspects of the camera, they are going to be highly limited in that regard. I'm just going to keep moving right on through to sensors because integral part of the cameras. Now, obviously, there's a lot of different cameras on the market, and one of the most important differences in them is the size of the sensor in the camera. So these are some of the most popular sensor sizes out on the market today. A full frame indicating it's the same size as a 35mm frame. I am not a big fan of this naming system, and I would like to propose that we change the naming to just simply measuring the diagonal of the sensor. It would be able to make things a lot more comparable. It's the same way we measure TV screens and computer monitors. And so the 43mm sensor can be very directly compared to a 28mm sensor, and you have a good feeling for the size difference between the two. There is a crop factor that we will talk about when we talk about these lenses. And the full frame sensors are what most of the serious professionals are doing because it can fit the most number of pixels and it can get the highest quality of image. And so in very general terms, the bigger the sensor, the better quality you're going to get. And so you want to get the biggest sensor that you're willing to carry around in cameras and lenses and whatever that total bulk is. So let's talk about lenses, obviously very important. And the first aspect I want to talk about on lenses is the focal length of the lens. What do you see from side to side? And so as we were just talking about, how do you measure these corner to corner, side to side, top to bottom? I'm thinking as you hold the camera in the normal horizontal position, what do you see from side to side? And so a 50mm lens, of course, is your normal lens, but if you have a cropped frame sensor, like a Nikon that has a 1.5 crop, the 35 gets you the exact same angle of view because you have a different size sensor. If all of this is confusing, check out my class, Fundamentals of Digital Photography. So landscape photographers, when shooting the landscapes, are often shooting wide angles because they want to show the larger environment. You are going to want a lens that gets down to the equivalent of 24mm lenses, of a 24mm lens. It's about 16 on a crop frame camera. If you don't, you're going to be really struggling to try to get everything in there. And to be honest with you, if you're really into this, you should have something that gets down to the equivalent of a 16mm lens. Every professional landscape photographer out there has a lens that gets down to 16 that I have ever met. It's just part of the tools, the equipment that you're going to use. It's also very valuable having a telephoto lens so that you can isolate individual subjects. A short telephoto lens around 100, you're going to want at least up to a 200mm lens. You're probably not going to need anything further than that. And that's one of the great things about shooting nature and landscape is you don't need to carry around a huge honking lens unless you also want to shoot wildlife. And that goes into that separate category that we're not going to talk about. Every once in a while, though, it is kind of nice to pull out that 400mm lens and shoot a shot that's just, it's got a different look. And I'll show you some examples here. So let's just kind of go through these 7 different examples, starting with the very wide angle lens. So 100 degrees from side to side, it's what we would call an ultra wide lens, 16mm lens. Why would you use this? Well, you find yourself in certain environments that are very, very tight. You can't back up. This is False Kiva in Canyonlands. It's not a very well publicized, but it's well known among photographers. And it's essentially just a little cave. And my back, well, actually my back is up against the wall, but my camera is practically up against the wall. This is as far back as I can get with a 16mm lens. And I didn't want to do any stitching. I mean, I could have done some stitching, but this is just one basic shot. So you're working in very tight environments from time to time. One of the main reasons that people use this wide angle lens is for a foreshortening effect. And this basically means you're exaggerating the size of the foreground in relationship to something that's in the background. And so this little purple plant is much, much smaller than Mount Hood in Oregon. We all know that. But by getting very close with a wide-angle lens, I can make them about the same size. So they are now of equal importance in my photograph. And so we're going to use this not quite for macro photography, but we are photographing subjects that are very close to us. In the slot canyons, having that wide-angle lens is very, very helpful to accentuate the lines in the walls, enabling us to see as much as possible from side to side. And so having a good wide-angle lens, I think, is kind of one of the key camera purchases that you're going to want to look into if you don't have that ultra-wide lens. Most cameras come supplied with a moderately wide lens of around 28mm on full frame or 18mm. The 18 to 55 kit lens is the most popular kit lens, but I think having something a little bit wider is something that I prefer. And you'll find as you get to know your photography better that you'll have certain favorite focal lengths that really see the world the way that you do. And I really like the 24mm lens. As much as I like using that ultra wide, I kind of like something that's not quite so exaggerated. It's more of a natural wide angle lens. I can still get that foreshortening effect where I'm using it with subjects in the foreground, drawing a relationship between them and what's going on in the background. And yes, our title slide that we chose for the title of this whole program was with a 24, which is one of my favorite, which just makes me feel good that I'm choosing the right stuff. 24mm lens in that case. Next up is what I would call the moderately wide lens. And very seldom does the nature photographer say, get me that 35 millimeter lens, that's the lens that I want. It's usually the lens that you need to use because that's just where life has put you, and that's where you have to have the lens in order to get the shot. You know, if you're out on a boat shooting an iceberg, you sometimes just got to zoom it to wherever you need to be in order to get the shot. And so it's valuable to have that 16 to 35 millimeter lens that Canon, Nikon, Sony, and so many other manufacturers have. That ultra-wide zoom is just really a very valuable tool for the nature and landscape photographer. Probably the least used lens, well, I shouldn't say probably, I know this for a fact. The least used lens that I have for doing this type of work is the 50 millimeter lens. It works out in some situations because you're forced into shooting something from a particular location. You zoom back and forth, or you put the lens on and you say, this is the content that I want to have in the photograph, and the 50 millimeter happens to be the right lens. Generally, it's not the case. Usually, you're trying to shoot something wider angle. Sometimes you want to shoot more telephoto, but sometimes you just don't have much control. And one would think that when you're not in the studio and you're out in the free world, you can go anywhere you want and shoot pictures. And the fact of the matter is that you're on a trail and you're not allowed to walk into the wildflowers, or you're on the top of a ridge and you clearly don't want to walk on either side of that ridge, and you are forced into shooting into very few positions, which is one of those reasons I would love to fly, so I could just hover over and be right over here to get that shot. And that's why having some zoom lenses are very, very valuable. The short telephoto lens is not what the amateur thinks about as being a valuable lens for nature photography, but it's actually an extraordinarily valuable lens. This is where you get to isolate subjects. Okay, maybe the entire scene of everything you're looking in front of you is not the greatest image in the world, but a portion of the image is. This is also where you are going to find macro lenses, and we'll talk a little bit about macro lenses in an upcoming section. But isolating details, pulling details from the environment around you. And because these details can be at various distances, this is where the 70 to 200 lens and shooting it at 200 becomes very, very valuable. This is the longest lens that most people really need to carry around with them. If I have a 70 to 200, I know that I'm good to go on the long end. And so shooting from a boat up in Alaska, pulling off some details of the fog and forest. We're starting to get into the effect of compression, compressing various subjects that I'm shooting together. A group of trees down in Portland, Oregon, or just outside of Portland, Oregon. Compressing the little hoodoos at Goblin Valley State Park in Utah. And it's nice to have. These are the cool lenses. These are the lenses that your friends think you are a great photographer because you have this big 400 millimeter lens. And these can be helpful from time to time when you have very distant scenes that you want to get up close to, but there's really no physical way to get that close up to it. So this is El Cap at Yosemite National Park. Or Oregon Painted Hills, using that compression effect to kind of take all those rolling hills and compress them all together in one image. Working up in Alaska, shooting an iceberg that's far off from the boat, being able to reach out and grab that and fill the frame is very, very nice to be able to do with that long lens. With the lenses, we can kind of divide them into two categories, the primes and the zooms. So the fixed lenses, in general, they're sharper, they're faster, and they're smaller. And those all sound like pretty good things. But the zooms have one thing going for it, versatility. And you'll find that in landscape photography, as I've just mentioned, it's really hard to put yourself in the right place, and having that zoom is very, very valuable. And when I say the primes are sharper, most of that is going to be noticed when you shoot them wide open. And you don't shoot wide open in nature and landscape photography a high percentage of the time. And by the time you stop either of these lenses down, you're going to find the sharpness to be virtually identical. And so most photographers doing this type of work are going to work with a couple or three zoom lenses. There are reasons for prime lenses, but for the most part, if I carry a couple of zoom lenses, I'm really set to go.